Hello, everyone, and welcome in. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on implementing continuous threat exposure management. Before we get started, I just have a couple of items to go over. The first is that we are recording the session and we will be sharing it out with everybody that registered shortly after the webinar is completed. We also have a chat and question function as part of this webinar. If you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat, which you can find at the top right corner of your screen. And looks like we've got a good amount of people, so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar on implementing continuous threat exposure management. Today, I'm joined by Jose Barajas, VP of Field Engineering. Thank you for joining us, Jose. I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Can you still see my screen?
I can't see it right now.
Okay.
It was there before.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry, team. Let me rejoin. Apologies.
Technical difficulties.
Always. Here we go. Okay, perfect. Got it. All right, team. So I'll get started in 1 moment. Of course, we rehearse and then, these applications change on you.
There we go.
Just like our application is changing, which is why I'm giving you an update today about CTEM. So with that, I see you can see my screen. Let's go ahead and get started, everybody. So my name is Jose Barajas. As I already got introduced, I'm a VP of Field Engineering here at AttackIQ. I also run the research with MITRE on behalf of the company, so I have that background. To share with everyone here, my background is as a practitioner. I spent 10 years reverse engineering malware, did a lot of development of like sandboxing technologies, and just researching, threats, CNCs, doing detection engineering. So that's the background that I'm coming from. And for the last 8 years, I've been here at AttackIQ, really developing our core capabilities around breach and attack simulation. And as you'll talk about today, there's a big shift happening. So today, what I wanted to walk you through is details around CTEM. This is a brand new concept, which I'll get into in a moment. But I want to give you an introduction to CTEM and then get into some of the technical things that are going to support some of that. So we'll walk through some slides just to talk about the general concepts about CTEM, the problems that our organizations are facing today. I'll break down the aspects of CTEM that are from a technical perspective, and then I'll actually jump into a demo and actually show you how these things function and work in practice. So that's what we're going to go through today. So please, feel free to ask questions along the way if you have any. We'll go ahead and answer those towards the end. Let me go ahead and just get started. So to start, one of the biggest challenges that we see in our space is these three things, starting with attack surface and just security control sprawl. Right? I think from a perspective of attack surface, we're seeing it yet again. Some brand new technology is being used all over the organizations. For those of you that have been around long, like me, you guys know this as shadow IT. As an example, but especially with these LLMs and all these capabilities that are out today, that attack surface has just changed for us, right? This is going to be a continuous and constant thing for us, and that's going to be a constant challenge. The other side of that house is, security control sprawls, right? We're constantly buying new technologies, implementing new technologies in order to protect ourselves, and that just becomes very, very difficult to manage. So that's one of the challenges. The other one is the adversary, landscape and the compliance landscape is getting more and more difficult. So from one side, the attackers are just attacking us more. And with the technology I just mentioned, the LLMs, it's just even easier for them to do things like generate a phishing email that is very, very convincing, right? On the other side of the house is the compliance landscape is getting more and more and more difficult. Doing what I do here at AttackIQ, I actually have to answer a lot of the security questionnaires as part of my work. And man, the questions over the last 5 years is getting more and more difficult, right? The demand for evidence, the demand for implementing processes is just growing more and more. And then we have things going on, especially in Europe, like DORA, that are requiring that testing as part of our process. So the demand from both keeping up with the attackers, but also keeping up with the regulatory requirements that we have to maintain as a business are just growing more and more. And for those technical folks on the call, you may not be seeing a lot of that from your perspective, but definitely your management, your executives are. So it's important that we work together, and you'll see that in a moment. And then finally, right, translating risk exposures into actionable business outcomes. I think this is a generic thing that we say a lot in our industry. I think for the folks here today on this call, I think this is ever more important for us than ever before, because one, as you'll see in a moment, our leadership actually is on the hook for a lot of this stuff. But also, in order for you to make movements and progress, and as a technical practitioner, knowing what needs to happen to make the organization safer, if you can't convince folks to actually go down the route that you need to make the organization better, that's a problem. So it's ever more important to be able to translate into the business outcome risk, so that way we can get the support that we need, whether it's monetary, you need to buy something else, maybe you need more people, or maybe you need to work closer with a different department that kind of we're butting heads with, or there's silos around. So those are the kind of reasons why these things matter to us, even as technical practitioners. And for us, the day-to-day is a continuous, endless cycle, right? As a new threat comes in, you're getting the CISO, the CIO, the CEO sending you emails. Are we protected against this? I just read this, right? Between that and the attack surface sprawl that we talked about, management of alerts across all the different technologies, it's just a constant loop of reaction, hopping from incident to incident, all the while in between kind of closing a bunch of alerts that aren't necessarily important or top of mind. So that's kind of the world that we've lived in, and I think we kind of get better, and then as things change, it's kind of this constant flux that we have to manage. And from the perspective of the different folks that we work with, they're really trying to answer completely different questions, right? The CISO just wants to know, that the security program is making an improvement, and he needs to show that to that board, right? He asked for X amount, he or she asked for X amount of dollars, the previous year to make some kind of notional improvement, whatever was promised. They need to be able to justify that, and also showcase that they're actually making improvements with the budget that they get approved, right? The security manager is really focused on, what their testing effort should be, what their remediation focus should be. And then, when we look at the analysts or engineers, we're focused on developing rules for very specific threats, or we're talking about the vulnerability side of the house. We just want to meet our SLAs for, criticals, highs, mediums, and those sort of things, right? So really, all these different folks are just focused on the same problem, but from a different perspective, given where they come from. And I think this is where we have a big problem in cybersecurity, is that these groups are completely siloed, right? And while the threat intel team is working on their threat intel stuff, the blue team is working on their stuff, the vulnerability team is working on something else. So from that perspective, as we have findings that either affect a different group, or another group needs to provide context or reprioritize their processes, that's where we start to run into problems within that. And by the way, I'm giving you all this background because it's important to know why this kind of concept of CTEM matters, and it's to help you justify to these other groups and help them get better, and actually work together through some of the data that I'll show you when I get into the demo. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is I'm definitely seeing, and the industry is also seeing, is a huge shift in accountability in cybersecurity. So now one thing that's changed, just so you know, is executives and boards are now being held accountable for breaches. What we're seeing is specifically they have to outline their cybersecurity risk management, governance, and board oversight, and they actually have to produce this form 10K as part of their annual report. So this is something that they have to talk about now. They are going to talk about now. It's no longer a question of that. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of too is, SEC now requires public disclosure of cybersecurity incidents. Now, this isn't new. As we're doing businesses with other companies, these disclosures have been important, but now these publicly traded companies have to report this in a public fashion. So that's obviously a big shift. And then finally, CISO's cybersecurity is not just IT's responsibility, it's a business risk. Gartner, I actually grabbed this from Gartner earlier this week, but 80% of boards view cybersecurity as a business issue. And I think they see it in a number of ways because take a look at these technologies now, LLMs. We're seeing a huge shift in what can we actually automate and productize and actually reduce the cost of business using these LLMs, right? Well, they can't move forward with this new technology unless it's secure because of the previous two things that I just mentioned. So ever more so, just seeing that at every level, what we do on our day to day is becoming more and more relevant to them. So just wanted to share that. And I think what that means is security needs to evolve, from technical enforcers to strategic enablers. And what I mean by that is, look, these technologies are coming, change is coming. How can we ensure that the business can get the value of these technologies while maintaining safe, right? They can no longer, say, don't use this, right? Or just kind of block us from accomplishing our goals, right? We need them to actually support us and enable us and be part of that loop that's going to help us get better. So I think that's the big thing there. All right. So that was a little bit of background just to share, I think, how kind of we see the world, how I see the world around what's changing and really what's driving this concept of CTEM, which is kind of bringing it all together based on kind of Gartner's view was, which I'll share with you as well. For ourselves, what this means is, we really need to go beyond kind of testing, which is just validating, okay, I ran some MITRE TTPs, I ran an entire adversary campaign. How am I doing? And that's what we've historically done here at AttackIQ and the entire breach and attack simulation market, to actually, trying to get a little bit more left of boom, as for those that know that kind of nomenclature, which is, where am I vulnerable and what are the vulnerabilities that matter, and actually thinking about it that way. And then taking it further still and actually trying to understand who's likely to attack me and how are they likely to do it. These are things that we've, asked ourselves continuously throughout, the history of cybersecurity. But I think today, with the framework that I'm going to show you, we can start to put it together so that, they can actually support each other and build a better picture of what should be focused on across these three things is the idea. Now, let's talk a little bit about Gartner. Gartner definitely defines, the market a little bit. So just to share with you all, kind of what are the nomenclatures that you'll start seeing. And one of those big changes you'll see is this concept of adversary exposure validation. This essentially is one of the three pillars of the CTEM framework that they develop. And I'm going to cover that just one more slide for you in the next slide, what CTEM is. But adversary exposure validation essentially combines breach and attack simulation, discovery data, and attack path management into one single category. So for those of you that may be looking for a breach and attack simulation solution or any of those other solutions that I just mentioned, just know that it's been concatenated into this one category per Gartner's kind of analysis there. And as you can see here on the left, there's a market guide. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely go check that out. But I thought it was important just to call this out for those on the call, just so you know where this nomenclature is coming from. And when you walk the halls of Black Hat, or if any of you that are going to be at InfoSec London and you see adversary exposure validation everywhere, and CTEM, this is why, right, from that perspective. Now, in terms of CTEM, this is actually an entire process that has been defined by Gartner. I don't want to spend too much time on this, breaking it down, but I did want to at least break it down for you at a very high level. And then I'm going to show you, some of the things that we do as a company to help support some of this. But, the first part is, first step in the CTEM process is scoping. This is extremely important because scoping not only in terms of, traditional pen testing, right, scope of the assessment or those sort of things, but actually scoping about what are the priorities, right? Talking to the executives, talking to the vulnerability teams, and then getting that context in one centralized way so that we can go ahead and have that context of what matters to the business in mind as we do things. The second big component is discovery, and what you'll see here is, we want to understand visibility across different attack surfaces, understand what's actually there, not just from the perspective of what our technology is logging, and you'll see this in the next slide when I kind of break it down, but actually, as we're running adversarial behavior, what are the things that I'm finding, like say this one asset that isn't in my Qualys scan, isn't in my Rapid7 scan, but I found it through, a Bloodhound attack. right? Why is it that that's not being managed correctly? Those are the kind of things that we can discover. The other thing too is going to be prioritization. What you'll see here in a moment, as I show you the different components of data that go into the CTEM process, we can use all that context to provide a sense of prioritization specific to, what are the attack paths that are most likely, and once validated, what are the attack paths that we've either confirmed we have a compensating control in place. We like to call those dead ends, but also, what are the areas of actual actively KEVs, and we should focus on those too, right? Now, finally, as we find attack paths, we're going to definitely validate them like I just described. And then finally, mobilization. And this is where, based on the scoping that you described and the process that you establish at your organization, you can make a decision about how you're going to triage and address things differently, given that piece here. And essentially, the way that gets put together is, and this is a very high level overview of what I'm going to show you in a moment from a demo, is we'll take context from your environment based on threat intel, vulnerability data, also data from directly some of your technologies. You can see here SIM, EDR, cloud, next generation firewall. What we'll do with that information is put it all together to help give you a picture of security control validation and your control capabilities, actively monitor any threats that are targeting you specifically in a hyper-local way. We can generate attack paths based on the data that we have in mind to give you a sense of what are plausible attack paths that we've observed. From there, we can give you a summary of your attack surface based on the context that we see. And then with the attack paths in place, the testing in place, and validation of these paths, we can then give you a vulnerability prioritization and then a risk score is the idea here from the perspective. And all this comes together to help scale your offensive testing, so we can do more and more testing, or as you'll see in a moment, actually get buy-in to do additional testing. We see a lot of folks say don't test in my area. This is my domain. Well, if you earn the right to do so through data, then we can scale that testing as well. Optimize defensive posture. This just means continuously validating your capabilities and ensuring that they're effective. And then finally, reducing exposures. This is the goal of it all, which is, how can we take the findings that we have and actually go ahead and present them in a way that we can get buy-in from either executives or other groups, being the big thing there to consider. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you here is going to be a little bit about, what I'm going to walk you through here. First of all, starting with, as we pull in all this data, one thing that we'll do is we'll actually create a visual map of the risk, telling you exactly how we're getting to the assets that, as part of scoping, you've defined are important to you. So instead of just giving you a random list of CVEs, we'll actually identify what is the path to get there, and then give you a plausible way of actually accomplishing that. And as part of that, you'll see in a moment, we'll actually go ahead and test that path to showcase that process. The other thing that we'll do is we see this a lot is working with the vulnerability team. Today MITRE developed the vulnerability framework, CVE framework. MITRE also developed the MITRE attack framework, but yet while they're two sides of the same coin, these teams are never talking to one another. So one of the things that we want to do is help give you some prioritized action based on the data that we've observed as part of that detail there. So. All right, that's a very quick walkthrough of kind of the CTEM framework, some of the components that are going to be a part of that. With that, let me go ahead and actually move into giving you a demo. So let me go ahead and reshare my screen. And let's go. Let me go ahead and show you the product demo. Okay. So this is the AttackIQ product. This is AttackIQ Ready, where we have our CTEM process developed. Let me go ahead and actually show you. I've been talking a lot about the general concepts, the problems we're trying to address. Let me actually show you how we accomplish some of the things that have been talked about and kind of the technical details that what goes into this process. And let's start with the first component that matters most, which is discovery. So for those of you that may have already been doing breach and attack simulation or are looking to get into it, I think one of the big shifts that we've seen with this implemented among our customers is that there's a lot that you can glean and understand by simply doing discovery. So before we ever need to get to the point where we're running any MITRE TTPs or any types of attacks, where for those of you that have been doing some breach and attack simulation, there may be some apprehension to that from different groups, different owners within your business. Well, we can just start with, simple discovery and use that as the basis to actually just get our foot in the door, and then based on that data, give an understanding of what needs to happen next. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean by that. The way that we've set up this process is it can do continuous testing. And the way that we do that is, behind this, what we have is we have a lot of those MITRE TTPs. So when we're talking about Active Directory, for those of you that are, done things with like Impacket as an example, and a variety of other tools that attackers are known to use, we're using those same kind of discovery tactics as a basis for doing things like Active Directory discovery, endpoint discovery, essentially doing things, locally on the local machine. We can do external network discovery. Think of local scans where we're identifying active services and those sort of things, or we can target, external CIDR blocks, host names, domains, applications in order to do discovery, and then even local network testing as well. So with this is how we can set up the discovery that's actually going to be ran on a continuous basis. We do this through agents that are deployed within the environment, and that's where we can initiate this discovery from. There is absolutely no need to have, an agent on every single machine, as one machine has the ability to do a ton of discovery on itself, and then the assets that are around it as part of the process. The other thing to call into question or to consider here is that we can also just go ahead and pull in data from some of the technologies that you already own and operate, whether it's insights from Rapid7, Tenable, or Qualys as an example. We can pull in that data and then use that context to get just the vulnerability data, but a number of other information from those assets. And then the other thing that we can do is we can pull in data from your EDRs and other technologies to get a sense of groupings, policies, and those sort of things, so we can start to showcase and have that understanding under one view, so that we can make decisions about what should be testing and when as part of that process. So that's the discovery piece that we've implemented here. The other thing I want to call out, though, is we can also do point-in-time testing. I mentioned that this testing is continuous. We use an agent to go ahead and do that. But what we've also done is we've created what we call FlexD packages. And what we can do here is, we can run a FlexD package to do internal network, Active Directory, or endpoint discovery. These Flex packages are actually self-contained packages. They don't require installation of an agent, and they can either be ran manually or SCCM Chef Puppet ran across your environment, so that we can go ahead and collect all that information across the different environments that you own and operate as part of that. Okay, so that's the discovery component. It takes a little bit of defining what you want to discover and set up that process, but once it's there, we can do so on a continuous basis and start to understand some diffs. So what do we do with all that data that I just talked about pulling in? Some of the things that we'll do just very quickly, and then I'll get into the details, is we can see, overall how many assets were discovered, the vulnerabilities that were found as part of that, unique networks that were discovered as part of that. Here we have some recommended tests. So even before we run any tests, based on the data that we glean and what we see, we can start to suggest some of the things that should be tested. Here we can see things like Gallium being suggested, content filtering. I'll get into that in a moment. But then we also have exposures. So based on what we've observed, what are some potential exposures that we've seen? Now let me take you to the analysis piece. And this is where we take all that data that we've observed and pulled in order to paint a picture for you. And I think this is where everything comes together nicely to give you a nice little view, starting with this overall view of the results. But let's go take a look at some of these risks, and let's take a look at this first risky asset that you see here. What we've done is we can see, based on the vulnerability data discovery that we've done, that this is one of the most riskiest assets. What we're telling you here is we can reduce your exposures by 20% if we implement some of the next steps that we describe here in terms of vulnerabilities that should be addressed and those sort of things. The other thing that we can talk about is what are the affected business impacts. So as part of this process, your management, other members of your team, or even yourself can actually define what are the critical assets within the environment. We also can glean some of that from your technologies, and then see what, based on the attack paths that we discover, what are some of the things and ways that we can reach them. And then finally, here we can see our vulnerabilities, and we can see here all the vulnerabilities that we've observed within the environment. Let me go ahead and just show you those really quick. So you have a ton of vulnerabilities here, but what I want to call out is we actually just finished this research with MITRE, and we can actually see what are the active KEVs that are here within an environment. And for those of you who may not know, KEV is a known exposure and vulnerability, meaning that a current threat actor is known to use this vulnerability as part of that campaign. So from that perspective, this is one way that we can very quickly give you a sense of prioritization for your team, is simply with that KAV marker. There's a little bit more to that, so let me go ahead and show you that. And the way that we truly prioritize all this is based on this attack path that we've built. In this case, you can see that we have multiple attack paths here. An attack path is essentially a step-by-step representation, and I'll show you, I like this little view better. We can say like, look, we can start here, and one thing to call out is saying that this is recently active. So this isn't at this point, plausibly this user account could be used to, traverse all the way down to the MySQL server that you see there. But we've actually are verifying, and let's come back here, that a user has recently logged into the system. So we have a cached credential here. As you can see, we take a step back, we can actually see the vulnerability that would actually allow potential vulnerabilities allow us to get to that system to begin with based on what we've observed. And then also based on those CVs, you can see here that we're recommending this Ghost ransomware. This is based on the fact that we've noticed a KEV associated with Ghost ransomware, and hence why we're recommending that as some of the testing here. So we can see here from the left, initial exploit to get in, the target there. We can see based on the domain control, the permissions that the user has. And then here we can see the different ways that the attacker can reach the actual end device here. And in this case, a customer's data with a specific impact that was defined here. The beauty of this is we can take the context and define the impact so that you can just focus on addressing the issues that you have in mind. But with that impact in place, it'll actually rise up the details so that we can go ahead and have that in place. So now these are the attack path that was drawn as part of this process. One thing I'll say is this is a great way of actually getting other teams to understand the value of why they need to address a specific vulnerability. So what do I mean by that? If we take a look here, some of the recommended tests here are things like Lasser's group, Nobelium. The reason for this is there's an active KEV that we've observed based on the vulnerability data. So this is why we're recommending this test. And what you can do is, go ahead and run that. I'm not going to run this live here just because I want to focus on other things. But we can run that live and get a validation of whether there's any attacks that are possible within that. And if they are, that just helps you go back to the vulnerability team and say, look, guys, this is the attack path that's possible. I validated this step here, and it is absolutely possible, right? This is why I need you guys to address these vulnerabilities by the end of the week, and on these other machines, we can address them later as an example. The other thing that we can do here is we can start to get an understanding of where we should be testing. One of the things that we've recommended here is to validate the network threats on the environment where this is sitting. The reason for that is we've noticed a variety of different subnets. If you recall, there was 8 different networks that we've observed. The network that we're actively sitting on has not been tested in the past. So hence why we're recommending that testing. So this is just an example of how, by taking the data in, giving you an understanding of what you should be focusing on from a testing perspective so that you can either prioritize addressing those recommendations, or we can, bring those down and focus on others that are actually possible today. And then finally, in terms of assurance for our security controls, we're giving recommendations here where we've seen that things have not been tested previously. Now, let's take a step back, and the way that we help summarize all of this detail is actually through this concept of exposures. And with exposures, what's great is we can either focus on it from the perspective of MITRE tactics. This is great when we're working with other security teams that are in cybersecurity, right? And we can focus in on the perspective of MITRE. We can also take these exposures and look at them from the perspective of control types. So we're working with that team that manages the next generation firewall. We can give them a set of exposure that they need to focus on. And then finally, we have various asset types. And this is where we're talking to the CIO that is very focused on risk. Was it data that was stolen as part of that process? Was it a network that was compromised, or a user credential that was compromised? These are the sort of things that we can go ahead and highlight based on who we're talking to showcase the exposures. And the way that we summarize these exposures is going to be providing a generalized description of what the exposure was. In this case, the fact that we're doing living off the land. We can give you a sense of the mitigation recommendations that we suggest, and we provide multiple types of mitigations. Starting with, first of all, MITRE mitigations. MITRE actually just did a complete rework of their mitigations. They've gotten way, way better, so I think that's a good starting point. We've also have very specific recommendations where we at AttackIQ will actually go ahead and find third-party tools or just provide recommendations. I should say third-party recommendations. And then the other thing that we can do is we can provide very specific detection rules or implementations for your technology. So whether you're a CrowdStrike shop, a Microsoft shop, or anything like that, we can actually translate one of these Sigma rules into a query that you can use to either find the event as a one-off, generate a detection rule, or implement that as a prevention rule going forward as part of that process. All the while, and this is where I'll end just to be respectful of everyone's time, giving you an understanding of where across the environment was this possible, and see like this is all on one test point, but also providing the evidence for that team when we're showcasing step by step what we did. So as part of this process, we're not just saying, hey, this is the exposure that we found, but we're giving them all the evidence that they need to address it. And then we can go ahead and validate that and rerun it to ensure that this exposure is no longer available given the changes that you made. So that's all I wanted to show you all today. We'll definitely have some follow-ons. This is a new concept in our industry. So we'll absolutely be following up with more context, more details. I wanted to give you an overview of CTEM, the concept, some of the details of how we're putting together a process, and that's what I wanted to show you today. So please please let us know if you have any questions or any follow-up, and more than happy to support you all. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose. We do have some questions. So let me go ahead and bring them up. So how can we leverage CTEM for the operational technology where our core critical infrastructure lies in and is meant to be secure in today's threat landscape?
Yeah, great question. So from that perspective, from that perspective, I think just like any other environment, I think with OT, there's just some special considerations in mind. We've actually done extensive work here. We did a project with CES 21, California Energy for the 21st Century. It's actually a huge project that we did here. To answer your question directly, the CTEM process can be applied to the infrastructure that actually manages and controls the OT environments. Those typically the choke points in order to actually manage the OT controls. That's actually going to be the easiest way of getting in and doing some level of testing. And then beyond that, I would say, testing within those environments, specifically the network layer, that's an easy way to test. Now, if you want to take it a step forward and actually test on the OT devices, definitely do it cautiously. But what we've done and the findings of the research that we did is during downtime is when we would actually go ahead and do testing on these devices. So my recommendation to you is during the next downtime, we can implement some of the testing that I walked you through today. And that way you can potentially say, look, we need to take down more of these and upgrade them because this is the active vulnerability that we've observed. So OT is a little special, but that's how I would approach it myself.
Great. And then we have a question from John. So John was also interested in how we are integrating AI both into the ability to test, but also how we are testing developed AI such as chatbots.
Yeah, so I would say we've actually been doing this for quite a while. We have a process called AttackIQ Virtual Advisor, and the advisor actually will actually help. I'll just pull this up. You see this in the middle, essentially here, we have AI-based orientation and orchestration. So it's not something that I specifically highlighted or re-exposed as a chatbot, but, in terms of making sense of the information and data, reorienting it, making sense of threat intel that's coming in, which we do monitor and have integrations with, or provide some of that ourselves. We're using that from that perspective. And then in terms of operating on the other side, we have specialized agents that can help take threat intel and distill that into what I should be testing. And it can be threat intel that you find out in the wild, or if it's proprietary threat intel that you have yourself, you can upload that report. It'll analyze it and provide the recommended testing. And then once you get the testing in mind, we can even generate detection rules. So as part of that process, so based on the test itself, and using the output data of that, we can dynamically generate signal rules, and we actually have a whole process to test that rule, validate its precision and recall. We'll definitely have a webinar on detection engineering. We actually have a whole workflow coming out for that soon. But those are the ways that we're using not just chatbots, but actually taking LLM capabilities and creating specialized agents and workflows to support what we do day to day.
Yeah, we definitely have some exciting stuff coming around that. So thanks for that question, John. This one was a bit more technical, I guess. One of our customers that's using AttackIQ for control validation, they were asking, we use AttackIQ tool for control validation, but most of simulation scenario prevented at the initial stage due to application whitelisting as security control gets the payload stopped for going further to a later stage. How can they validate endpoint hardening by going through full simulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sounds like a little bit of very specific to your environment is something to consider. But I think, in general, our attack graphs, they can actually be ran in multiple modalities. So we can have a modality where we say, look, stop where we have the initial, mitigation at a specific step, or I just want to run through it in order to see what would happen, assuming I would go forward. And we can even do things like, you can provide credentials, so we can assume credential theft just for the purposes of assuming and moving forward. So there's a few ways of approaching those. You can actually, happy to get into that. Just reach out to us. My email is jose@attackiq.com, easy to remember. That'd be one approach. But I would say I think there's different ways that we can configure the testing to execute in different ways, would be the way of approaching that.
All right, and then let's do one more. This is kind of like a two-part question. So, do you agree that CTEM will be an integral part of the digital operational resilience testing program slash cybersecurity testing program, and that it should not be a standalone solution? And how are you prioritizing that? Can this person use their own algorithm for producing the priority for remediation? For instance, to be able to apply existing very complex in-house risk rating methodology.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. CTEM is similar to a lot of other concepts we have in cybersecurity, right? Zero trust being an example of that. Purple teaming being another example of that. There's not going to be a solution that is just going to magically make you accomplish what the goals of those programs are. It's going to be a program. I think that's why at AttackIQ here, we focus on building programs with our customers. So from that perspective, we can give you all the technology in the world, but if you don't have buy-in from the different groups, if you don't have buy-in from your executives to actually have a program around this and a process around CTEM, it's just not going to be successful. So that's absolutely critical that we have buy-in and are working together. And I think what the CTEM process does do is it's going to help, take the views of the vuln group, the threat group, and kind of put it together in one view so we can sit down and have a conversation around it, where today we're just throwing stuff over the fence is what I would say. So that's the first part. And then apologies, what was the second part of that question? I want to make sure I address that.
The second part of the question was, how do you prioritize? Can they use their own algorithm for producing the priority for remediation? For
Yes.
instance, in-house methodologies.
Yeah, so for prioritization, we're definitely have a rubric as part of that. I didn't get a chance to touch on it. We'll definitely follow on and focus on that on another session. The way that we're doing it is we'll actually give you some levers, right? So for specific parts of our rubric, letting you actually define, a scale. So that would be the way that we're exposing. I wouldn't say that, we can give you, yeah, that's the way that we're exposing that access to you. And then there's various ways for those that are more advanced to maybe do your own quantification in-house. I know there's a lot of data that maybe you don't want to share with us. And then through an API, you can absolutely create a process to then prioritize specific things. So depending on, whether you're dealing with not wanting to share with us or just, something in-house, or just wanting to modify the rubric that we've developed, those would be the two ways of approaching that today.
Awesome. So thank you everybody, who engaged, who asked us questions. If you guys have any more questions and you want to reach out to Jose or somebody on the AttackIQ team, feel free to go to our website and fill out a meeting form. Like I said at the beginning, we recorded this session and we will be sharing it out with everybody who registered. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to join us, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.